Naturally, it's as simple as that. Now, sincerely speaking, I don't think that the common agricultural policy really harms Africa at all. It harms Argentina. It harms Brazil. It harms the big grain producers and exporters, but not necessarily the African countries. The African countries, in reality, a large part of their agricultural production, on the contrary, has free entrance, zero custom duties in the EU. And in fact, one of the problems that we face now with the African countries, sub-Saharan African countries particularly, is that the results of the Uruguay round, I'm not talking about the Doha round going on right now, has eroded their preferential treatment because the EU that was treating them preferentially continues to do so, but has now to lower its tariffs also in regard to other countries, other third countries. And then when they have the preference eroded, then they are less competitive in our market and they can export less. That particular element, for instance, has harmed the Africans more than the common agricultural policy in that specific case. So sometimes there is a lot of assumptions made with the common agricultural policy. The common agricultural policy is a result of the after-war period in Europe. It's at the time, a very well-defined idea that a continent, or a country for that matter, had to be self-sufficient in food. And the agricultural policy was established to ensure that Europe would be self-sufficient in food, and all the mechanisms of incentives of all kinds, etc., subsidies were established. Then it was a good bargain. Again, there we come to the relation between France and Germany. France received the best input from the common agricultural policy, well, but Germany in return could have better access to the industrial goods market, etc. That time, of course, has evolved and has changed. And in the meantime, I think we have undergone through very serious reforms of the common agricultural policy. The common agricultural policy of today has very little to do with the one 5 years ago. So this is evolving very fast. But we still recognize that in many respects, our policy is a distorting factor in the international trade of agricultural goods. We recognize that, and we are willing to sit at the table and negotiate the ways to modify this. And this is what we have been doing at the Doha round, unfortunately without success. But it's not because we don't have the will. Simply, it's not an easy matter to solve. But I want to insist in this fact. I mean, it's true that we distort the international trade. In that sense, in a very general way, it might affect also Africa. But it's not really the African production of agricultural goods that is affected.
Yes, but Ambassador Valenzuela, your statement that it has certain negative implications is the understatement of the century. Under the common agricultural policy of today, every cow in France is receiving a subsidy of $2 a day for being a cow. And that is more than the net income of 2 billion human beings in the world. So cows in France are living better than 2 billion human beings in the world. And I think that is an indefensible position. And so you should be ashamed of what you are trying to defend here.
No, not exactly. I mean, I think...
You are not ashamed.
No. It's because, well, if you put the argument that way, obviously it's not a very acceptable situation. But the reality is not exactly that one. The reality is that there are so many costs that, I mean, you could do exactly the same with a large number of human activities in which the effort that you consent in one direction, if you compare it to what is happening in another direction, seems not to match. We have the paramount example of that, of course, is what is spent on armament, for instance, in the world. No? With what is spent with armaments in the world, well, you could probably solve all the problems of poverty in the world. But we know that the reality is very complex, and you cannot simply make one thing disappear, security problems disappear, for instance, in order to solve the other problem. You have to try to manage all these things more or less together. But what I intend to say is that in the common agricultural policy, as long as what we do in terms of subsidies and helps to the farmers is self-contained, or we manage to have it self-contained in two aspects. One, that we don't do what we used to do, which is to subsidize their exports. So then doing unfair competition in the markets of the world. That we have almost finished with it. Not 100%, but almost finished with it. And as long as we also allow that without compensatory tariffs, other products from other parts of the world can come into our market, we are not making completely disappear our negative effects, but lowering them down to a level which can be accepted if you think also in other terms. For instance, if there was no common agricultural policy, probably Europe would be a continent with big urban locations, industrial, polluting probably places, and then desert places, because there would be no farmers, there would be no people living in the countryside, etc. Because our businesses, our industries, etc., are so developed that if you don't compensate somehow to the farmer, it doesn't pay to be a farmer. Everybody would want to be something else in Europe and not a farmer. So in order to help maintain that social tissue in the continent, you need to give some incentive to people to stay in the villages, to stay at the farm, and to continue to do that. So you need, on the one hand, to ensure that you have a certain capacity of self-sufficiency in terms of food provisions, and at the same time, you need to sustain and maintain a social tissue in the countryside. Obviously, that sometimes can interfere with the needs of other people, and that is why we always thought that the Doha round negotiations were so important, because that's the place where you can try to find the balances in these things.
My name is Andrew Costa, in the class of 2012. My question relates to the fact that last year's college graduates and this year's upcoming college graduates face a very serious challenge, which is that the jobs in our country, in the United States of America, are shoring up. They're going overseas, and blessed with money. A number of those jobs are going over to Europe. A number of those jobs are going to developing nations. And I'm curious to see what you think of this globalization of the job market and how it affects the European Union.
Yes, I think that the European Union more or less has the same, or suffers, if you want to put it that way, the same effects than here. But again, I don't think, as in many occasions, it depends on the time frame that you look at the problem. If you look at a very short period of time, then you see a problem. You see that, for instance, job opportunities disappear because certain activities are outsourced away to third country, etc. If you look at it in a longer period of time, there is a certain logic in thinking that the fact that that outsourcing will make that other country grow and develop will increase the exchanges between this country and the other country, and at the end of the day also bring new activity to the first country. A bit complicated what I've said, but what I mean is that if you take a longer period of time, you can see that this kind of globalization should, at the end of the day, bring more